Hi all. Really excited about this tutorial here because this is the beginning of where the rubber meets the road with Blender and iClone. This is part one of a three-part series where we're going to model a piece of furniture, a pub table in this case, and we are going to texture it in Blender and then ultimately export it out to iClone and use it in a scene in iClone. I have Screencast Keys set up, so down here you'll be able to see anytime I click the mouse, like there's a left click, there's a right click. It'll show you what I'm doing. I'll try to explain what I'm doing as I do it, but if I miss any steps, this will keep me honest. You just look here. Now, a lot of the shortcut keys I'm going to use are going to be based on my number pad. I have a full scale keyboard, I have a number pad. Blender loves a number pad. If you have a laptop, odds are these days you have a laptop with a number pad. If you don't have a laptop with a number pad, it's real easy to configure render to handle that. We'll go to Edit, Preferences, go to Input, and say Emulate Numpad. And then the number keys on the top of your keyboard will act as if they are the same as the numeric keypad. Okay? So that's how you can fix that. With that, let's get started. So when you first open up Blender, you're going to see something like this. You're going to see a camera, a light, and then what's called the default cube. We are going to start with the default cube because we're going to make that our tabletop. So the first thing I'm going to do is rename it. I'm going to double click on cube over here and call it tabletop. Now I know my tabletop has very specific dimensions. It's X and Y, and by the way, to select these both, I just click and drag immediately, right? So click and drag and release, and now I can type it in. The X and Y of the pub table, the X and Y is 1.015. So that's a little more than a meter across in each direction. Now the thickness of the tabletop itself is just 0.018 meters, 0.018. So I'm measuring things in centimeters, so it's 1.8 centimeters, and then I have to convert it to meters in Blender because that's what Blender likes. So now we've got our tabletop sized correctly. We want to use actual physical dimensions whenever you're dealing with buildings or furniture, for the most part. If you're doing external views of buildings, not as important. But if you are creating things that are going to interact with human beings, you want to have them built to scale. So that's why I measured the top of my pub table. So now that we have the top of the pub table, we're going to do the struts. The struts are the support struts that go right underneath the table itself to really give it some substance. So to do that, we're actually just going to duplicate this tabletop. So you can see I've got it selected. It's got the orange highlight, Shift D, and then if I just move it around, we don't want to move it around, so I'm going to right click, and that sets it back right in the exact spot it should be. We're going to call this Tabletop Struts. I find it very helpful to actually name your meshes as you go, because once you get into more involved models, knowing what you're looking at is very helpful. Otherwise, you're looking at cube, cube.001, cube.002, very easy to get lost. The dimensions of the tabletop struts are as follows. X and Y, it's going to be 0.995. It's actually just inset 1 centimeter on each edge from the tabletop itself. And the Z on this is going to be 0.056, so it's 5.6 centimeters high. I'm going to hit the 1 key to get a side view, and we can see that it just looks a little too high, right? Obviously the support struts need to be underneath the tabletop. We're going to scroll in. If I shift and click the middle mouse, I can pan the camera. So now I've got the tabletop struts selected, and I'm going to hit G and then Z. G is to move it, Z constrains it to one axis, the Z axis in this case. I could also hit GX and GY if I want to constrain on those axes. So I'll get it moved where I want it. Should be right on the edge. I'll click out and make sure I don't see a black line, because sometimes this can happen. All right, if you see that, that's not good. That will bite you at the absolute wrong time. So GZ does not be perfect, just has to be touching in this case. Okay, there we go. Now, I'm going to hide the tabletop itself. So we select the tabletop, we hit the H key to hide it. I'm going to hit the 7 key on the numpad to get a top-down view. This has been scaled. So you see the scale factor here. I want to apply that scale before I do anything else to it. So I'm going to hit Control A, all transforms. So now you see it scale as 1. This is now the native scale for this particular set of tabletop struts. However, the real tabletop struts are not a solid mass. They actually have some geometry to them. We need to cut out this internal part. So we're going to hit Shift D again, and we're going to scale, hit S to scale, and then Z, and we're going to drag it see what I got here. Scale Z. Okay. Scale it, then we're going to GZ, bring it up so we can see it. Hit the 7 key, and now we're going to scale it again, but this time we're going to scale it because we're going to use it as a cutter. So that outside area is going to be the wood supports. The inside area is going to disappear. And we do that using a built-in tool for Blender called Bool Tool. So we have our, let me rename this, it's going to be our Tabletop Cutter. And then I'm going to shift select our tabletop struts. And you see the tabletop struts is highlighted. One is an orange and one is more of a yellow or amber. The yellow or amber one, depending on your settings, but these are the defaults, is going to be the selected one. So that's the one we're going to act on. So now what we want to do is we want to hit Control and then on the numpad minus. And that does a Boolean cut. Now the cool part is, this is what's called non-destructive modeling at this point. So if I were to click on this Boolean cutter and hit G to move it around, you can see that we could adjust it if we wanted to. I'm going to hit the escape key to stop that. One of the other things we could do is that we could scale it on everything but the Z-axis. So I hit Scale S for scale and then Shift Z, which means don't scale Z, and we can do the same thing here. I'm going to hit escape to get out of that, but I'm actually pretty happy with how that came out. So we are good to go there. The advantage of working non-destructively is you can always go back and make changes if you need to. But this is a very simple tutorial. I'm going to keep your life simple. So we are going to make this destructive, which means we're going to commit to making this cut on our tabletop struts. So we click on Tabletop Struts. Down in the Modifiers tab, which is the little wrench, we see we have a Bool Tool, Tabletop Cutter. We are getting a difference, which means we're cutting. We could join them together. We could just show the intersection of them too, but we want the difference. I'm going to click this little down arrow, and we're going to say Apply. Okay, now if I grab that tabletop cutter and move it around, it doesn't do anything because the change has been applied. As a result, now I can delete. So select Tabletop Cutter, hit the delete key on the numpad or the X key on your keypad, and you can delete it. Now with that done, I'm going to hit Alt-H to unhide our tabletop, and we can see that this looks a little better, all right? Now the other thing we want to do is we're not quite done with the tabletop yet. We're pretty close. We want to hit the tab key to go into edit mode. We want to select the faces here. That's what this is. This selects only the vertices, the tips of the points. This selects the edges. And this selects faces. So here I'm just going to select this top face. So if we take a look at this tabletop, we can see that the scale is not set to 1. So we want to apply all transforms before we start to do anything to this. So once again, the tabletop selected, we hit Control A, all transforms, and its scale becomes 1. Perfect, so we won. Now we hit the tab key to go into edit mode. We're going to select just this top face. We're going to hit Control B to bevel it. Beveling is actually very important. As a matter of fact, let me escape out of this. I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here so we can see better what we're doing. One of the things that makes 3D objects look fake is they are too perfect. In this particular case, this tabletop, these are exactly 90-degree edges. And if these existed in the real world, even though it's 90 degrees, that would be a very sharp edge. We want to add a little bevel. Everything in the real world has a little bit of a bevel to it, okay? Unless it's a knife edge. But other than that, everything else can have a bevel. So we hit Control B. I'm going to hold down the Shift key so I have some control. And I don't want a big bevel. I want a little bevel. So I'll leave it like that. And now this brings up this bevel control at the bottom. I want to have it for at least, I'll say 3 segments. And that's going to give us a little bit of an edge. What this bevel or this edge does for us is when you are rendering it, there is greater opportunity to pick up shine, reflection, things like that. Things that make it look a lot more real. Now similarly, these edges here are going to operate the same way. So here I'm going to go to Edge Select. I'm going to select this edge. And then I'm going to say select similar by direction. And you'll see that selects all of these. Right? And you see they got that orange. Hope you can see that on YouTube. So we're going to zoom in a little bit. And we're again going to say Control B. I'm going to hold down the Shift key because I don't need a bunch of changes. I just need a little bit of change. Now when you're beveling, you don't want the bevels to overlap much, right? So you don't want to go too much like that. We just want to take the edge off, as it were. So that'll be fine. And that occurred to all of our selected edges. Okay? Perfect. Hit the Tab key to exit edit mode. Now we need to place the tabletop and the struts at exactly 91 centimeters high to the top of this table. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to parent the struts to the tabletop. When we parent something, that means that wherever we move the parent, the child will follow. So here I'm going to click on Tabletop Struts, and then I'm going to Shift Select Tabletop, and that has them backwards. The struts are highlighted, the tabletop is not. If I Control left click over here, now the tabletop is selected. So at this point I hit Control P to parent. You've got a lot of options here. For our purposes, we just need object as they are. Okay, so great. I'm going to hit the 1 key to get a side view. And as you can see, the origin is this little dot here. The origin for the tabletop parent is dead center in the tabletop. We don't want that. We want to put that origin on the very top of the table so that we can place the tabletop exactly at 91 centimeters. So with the tabletop selected, Tab key to edit, we want to go into face mode again. Click that face. I'm going to say mesh, snap, cursor to selected. The cursor is this red and white circle here. That's your 3D cursor. Front view again with 1 on the numpad. It's exactly at the top of that table. So now we want to move the origin to the 3D cursor. We hit the Tab key to go out of edit mode, back into object mode. We select object, set origin, origin to 3D cursor. And that's all there is to it. Now, the origin on the Z location, because we're setting the height, and the height is the Z axis, needs to be 91 centimeters or 0.91 meters. We enter that. If we scroll back, we can see we have our tabletop exactly the height it should be. Now at this point, Blender is really stable software, but it's always good to save your work because things happen. So we're going to say save. I'm going to go into the folder I've set up for this tutorial. I'm going to overwrite this one here for part 1. And we're going to say, we're just going to save it as that file. Now the next thing we want to model is that shelf that goes below the tabletop. So to do this, we're going to add a new cube. And that means I'm going to hit Shift A, Mesh, Cube. And we're going to name this cube Shelf Top. Now we're going to set its dimensions for the X and Y. There's our item, scale dimensions. Remember, it's easy to do this wrong. Go to scale. You want to set the dimensions. This is 0.465 on the X and Y. And then the height is also, again, 0.018. Okay, and there's our shelf. Hit Control A to apply those changes, the transforms. Now we're going to duplicate this for our struts that support the shelf. So we're going to hit Shift D, right click, so we don't want to move it. We're going to go to the side view, which is the 1 key. We want to name this Shelf Struts so we know what they are. And we want to set its size to XY is also going to be close to what we had. The old one was 0.465. The new one is just going to be 0.46. We're introducing a little bit of difference. And we're doing that deliberately because we want that edge to stand out on the shelf. Okay? Now the depth of these struts are actually 0.035 or 3.5 centimeters. So let's zoom in on what we've got here. And we can see that our struts they're too high compared to the tabletop. So again, we're going to hit G, Z. I'm going to hold down the Shift key, say pull the mouse down to get the struts down where they should be. Okay, now we can see the scale of this needs to be modified, so I'm going to apply the scale. Control A, all transforms. And now I'm going to hit the / key. And that's going to hide everything except what we have highlighted. And once again, you see these struts? Not quite right, because it's solid. Should be struts just like on the tabletop. So we are going to duplicate this file by hitting Shift D, not file. We're going to duplicate this object. We're going to right click to not move it. We're going to call this, for the time being, Shelf Struts Cutter. And I want to scale the Z by 1.5, okay? And the reason I scaled the Z is so it's going to be a little thicker because we're going to use it as a cutter. All right, so now I'm going to hit 7 for a top-down view. And now I'm going to hit Scale Shift Z because I don't want to scale the Z. I just want to scale our cutter down so that it cuts out the inside. You can see it's aligned with the top. And this brings up something interesting here. I don't know if you can see it as I move it around. See those lines flickering across? That's called face fighting. Face fighting occurs when two objects have a face in the exact same area. So you'll see these flickers only occur where these two objects intersect in 3D space. To get rid of that, we're simply going to, with this control here, we're going to hit G, Z. I'm going to hold on the Shift key. I'm just going to lift it up a little bit. Okay? Great. Now I want to hit Control Shift. Actually, let me go ahead and apply. I get kind of anal retentive about this. So we have the cutter highlighted. I'm going to Shift click on the outside. And once again, we're going to do a Boolean cut. So that's going to be Control and then minus on the numpad. Now, go up. Yeah, it looks good to me. So at this point, I'm going to go to my shelf struts, take this modifier, and I'm just going to apply it. So now we're going to hit the / key again to unhide the top. The shelf struts cutter, since it's applied, we no longer need it. We're going to hit the, and this time I'm going to hit the X key. And this brings up something else very important with Blender. The commands that you enter are window specific. So for example, the X key, if my mouse cursor is here, I don't have to click on anything, it just has to be present. I can hit the X key to delete and it'll prompt me, or I can hit the delete key and it won't do anything, because delete doesn't mean, well, actually, hang on, it does. I can hit the delete key. I'm going to Control Z to get out of that. If I do it over here, shelf struts cutter, I can hit the delete key and it deletes it from there. There are some commands though that only work in one window and not another, or another type of window. There's a bunch of windows in Blender. I'm not going to get into it, but just be aware, if you see me issuing a command and it's not working for you, take a look at where your mouse is when you issue that command. So now we have our shelf built, and we are going to take, just double check them, they look good. I'm going to Shift click so that the shelf top is selected and the shelf struts are below it. I'm going to hit Control P again to parent them as an object. Now I want to click just on the shelf top. I'm going to go into edit mode, so you need to get the shelf top where it belongs. I'm going to click on the face, mesh, snap, cursor is selected, tab key to exit edit mode to go back into object mode, and now under object, set origin to 3D cursor. Now by my measurements, the top of the shelf should be 40 centimeters off of the floor. So we're going to set the Z location here to be 0.4. We're going to hit the 1 key for a side view, and we're going to use the wheel to scroll out, and that looks pretty good. I'm real happy with that. So now, as always, I'm going to say object, snap, cursor to world origin. I like keeping the cursor in the world origin. Sometimes it'll bite you if you don't do that, because you'll be creating things you'd assume it's in the origin and they're not. So the final thing we have to make are the legs. So I'm going to hit Control S just to save our work so far, just in case. And a leg is, once again, just going to be based on a cube. So we're going to hit Shift A, mesh, cube, comes in huge, that's okay. We're going to set the dimensions. The X and Y dimensions, where I click and Shift, are both 0.055. Let me get that right. Or 5.5 centimeters. The height overall is 0.89 meters, or 89 centimeters. So that's the appropriate leg size, but as you can see, the position is all wrong. Once again, what we want to do is set the origin to the bottom of this and then move the whole thing up where it belongs. So we're going to go into edit mode, Faces are selected. By the way, you can hit the 1, 2, or 3 key to modify which one of these you have. So if you can have, if we say we have vertices selected, we can just hit the 3 key, bang, we have faces selected. I'm going to scroll in, I'm going to make sure the one face is selected, mesh, snap, cursor to selected, tab to exit object mode, object, set origin, origin to 3D cursor, and now, since our floor is always at 0 on the z-axis, we just set our z to 0. I'm going to hit the 1 key for a side view, and not bad. Let's grab our tabletop. We're going to right click it, and we're going to say select hierarchy because we want to select the struts also. They're not automatically selected. Hit the H key to hide them. Now we're going to hit the 7 key to get a top-down view. And this cube, let's go ahead and double click this and let's rename this to a leg. Now we're going to move this leg so its location on the XY. I've measured this out before, but you can just do it visually, measure it out where you want it. It's going to be negative 0.23. And that's going to put it right on the corner of this shelf, where the shelf bites into it a little bit because the shelf gets its support from those legs. Now we could copy and paste legs all the way around, but I'm going to show you a better, more efficient way of doing this. So first thing we're going to do is with this leg selected, we're going to say object, set origin to 3D cursor. Here's why you always want to reset your 3D cursor to the world origin, because we just made the assumption that's where the cursor was. And we were wrong. That's okay. So you go object, snap, cursor to world origin, and now our object here is still selected, object, set origin, origin to 3D cursor, and we're good to go. Now why do we set the origin to the 3D cursor? Because the array modifier is going to rely on that. We're going to say I want to mirror this leg on the x-axis, and it's going to need to know mirror it from what point. Well, we're going to do it from the origin. We add a modifier for an array. We want just 2 because we're going to have 2 legs going across the x-axis. This x-axis, however, is too small. It's got a factor of 1. So the factor is always a multiplier, but it's a multiplier of what? It's a multiplier of the x-axis of this one leg. So it's going to add 5.5 to it, so it's going to be lined up right next to it. Now we can hit and scroll this. I happen to know that the number I want is going to be 8.37. So on the X factor, I'll hit 8.37. And now we have that exactly where we want it. To get the other 2 legs, we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to add, I'm going to hit this little down arrow to collapse this. I'm going to add another array modifier. Instead of factor x, we're going to have factor x of 0, and we are going to set the y, which is in up and down, looking at from the top down, to 8.37 again. And bang, we have all 4 legs. All right, I'm going to hit Alt-H to unhide everything. And we have a pub table. And that looks pretty darn good. The other thing we might want to do here is actually we've got this leg. I want to bevel these edges here just a little bit. Because once again, these are going to be razor sharp. So I'm going to hit Tab to go into edit mode. I'm going to hit the 2 key so that now I'm selecting the edges. I'm going to select one edge, and I'm going to say select similar, and we'll say length. That's going to be all of these edges. Now it only shows it on this one because this is the one real bit of geometry. The rest of them are just copies. So I'm going to come in here. I'm going to say Control B. I'm going to hold down the Shift key because I just want a little bit of a bevel. Not a lot. That's good. Now it's still set for 3 segments. I think that's overkill for something as small. I'll just set it for 1 segment. And now we have a nicely beveled but untextured, unshaded pub table. But really, it looks very good. And you can see how simple it was to do this in Blender. Now, the other thing I want to call out to your attention before we wrap up here are these collections. A collection is just a way of dealing with the objects in your model. So I just went to the scene collection, right click, hit new collection. It gives you the default name. We don't want this. I'm going to call it table. And I want the leg up here, the shelf top. I'm going to hit select hierarchy because it has stuff under it. Oh, I'm still in edit mode. Let me get out of edit mode. You need to do all this stuff in object mode. Select hierarchy. We're going to move that into the table. Tabletop, select hierarchy. We can also hit the M key. There's always multiple ways of doing everything in Blender. Now, I want to click the leg, and then I want to click tabletop, and then I'm going to control click tabletop. So it's the actual selected object. Everything is sort of selected, but this is going to be the main parent. And that's what I want to do. I want to parent all the rest of those components to the tabletop. So we hit Control P, parent it to the object. Whoa! Well, that's interesting. Look at that. That jumped way down, didn't it? So let's do the following. Control Z to undo what we just did. These shelf struts, they look good. Tell you what we're going to do here, though. We're going to take shelf struts, object, set origin to 3D cursor. We're going to hit the shelf top. We're going to do the same thing here. Object, set origin to 3D cursor. And then we should, you could do on right select on this. I can say select objects. That'll select everything. I'm going to control click on the tabletop. Control P to parent them. We have the same problem there. That's okay. Control Z to get rid of that. I just want the tabletop struts, object, set origin, origin to 3D cursor. Once again, we'll select everything. I'll control click tabletop, and for the 3rd time, hit Control P. The tabletop also has to have its origin set to the 3D cursor, or set to the 0, 0 location. So actually we can select everything. I can say object, set origin to 3D cursor. So everything has its origin to the 3D cursor. Now I can control click the tabletop, Control P to parent it, and say object. Now everything is located with this tabletop. So if I grab this tabletop now and I hit the R key to rotate it, the table rotates as 1 unit. You've really just accomplished quite a bit in a very short period of time. So congratulations. That's going to wrap up this video. Now in the next video, we're going to take this exact model and we're going to shade it so that it looks like it's made out of wood. And this will give you the option to make it a light wood, a dark wood. You can make it look painted, whatever you want. We're going to go into shaders and materials, get this thing looking like we want it to look, and then we're going to, in part 3, export it into iClone so that we can start to use it. There are some intricacies there also. So that's it. I hope you found this useful. If you did, please send a like. Just takes you a second, doesn't cost you anything. And subscribe if you want to hear more or get notifications when future videos are released. All right, that's it. Thank you very much for your time, and I will see you in the next episode.